Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tracy Noah from the Marion Library Service, and welcome to our Library Through the Lens Live History Month presentation with special guest Rob McLennan. Since the closure of our libraries and venues, we've been working hard to still connect and engage with you through our Library Through the Lens series of adult programs delivered differently. We had to reimagine how to bring you the author talks and programs that you've grown to expect from us. So thank you for joining us today. This afternoon, Rob, Adelaide Coast FM 88.7 magazine program presenter and board member, will share with us his extensive knowledge of SA radio broadcasting, community radio, and City of Marion's own local station, Adelaide's Coast FM. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type questions you have for Rob into the Q&A text box on your screen, and later I will ask these for you. Over to you, Rob.
Much, Tracy, and thank you for the invitation to participate in Library Through the Lens. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this too. I'm used to addressing Probus clubs and Rotary clubs and various service organisations when I talk about radio, the history of radio and community radio. And good afternoon to everyone who's joined us. I really appreciate you coming on board, and to Jennifer, who typed in that she had an odd screen. Jennifer, that's most probably me. I thought I'd start with talking about radio and when it actually began, and then and just very quickly go through that, and then talk about radio, focusing on radio in South Australia. Heinrich Hertz was actually the first to demonstrate radio waves back in 1888. However, it's widely considered that the founding father of radio was Marconi, an Italian who lived from 1874 to 1937. He was born in Italy, but he moved to Britain when the Italian government showed very little interest in his work in radio. In 1895, Marconi discovered that an antenna would assist in the transmission and reception of radio waves. And in 1901, he broadcast a signal across the Atlantic using balloons to lift his antenna. And interestingly, he then formed his first company that made radio equipment, and he actually received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1909, just before the First World War. After a series of firsts in broadcasting, Marconi's company opened a London radio station whose call sign was 2LO. And it was from here that the fledgling BBC started broadcasting in November 1922. And that's a lovely segue into radio in South Australia, because the BBC started in November 1922. And the first radio station here in Adelaide, or in South Australia, in fact, was 1924. So just 2 years later after the BBC, which is really very exciting and shows how progressive they were back then. That was 5DN in Parkside. In 1927, 5KA started in Prospect, and they were actually way back then, can you imagine? They were a sports radio station, and they were actually the first ones to do a broadcast of a footy game at Adelaide Oval. So they were very progressive. In 1926, 5DN, who had started in Parkside, as I mentioned, they started introducing advertisements, and they were £1 for 1 minute. So commercial radio was up and running. In 1924, the same year as 5DN commenced, the ABC also commenced with a radio station called 5CL. And in 1930, 5AD began broadcasting. And it wasn't that long after, just a couple of years later, that in fact regional radio started broadcasting as well. And I'm not going to mention all the stations, but in 1932, 5PI in Port Pirie commenced, 1934, 5MU in Murray Bridge, 1937, 5SE in Mount Gambier, and then Port Augusta had 5AU in 1938, just a year before the war. So radio was growing at an incredibly rapid rate right throughout South Australia. I'm going to jump quite a few decades now, and in 1975, the ABC moved to Collinswood, to that very unattractive building that's still standing. And I'm an ex-Victorian, and so I had assumed that 5AA had been around forever, but in fact they only commenced in 1976, so I regard them as quite a new radio station. And in the same year, 1976, the first FM commenced in South Australia. FM stands for frequency modulation. And in the same year, 1976, the ABC commenced broadcasting 24 hours a day, which was a real breakthrough, because if you can remember, we used to stand in front of the radio or in front of the television at midnight, and God Save the Queen would come up and or come on, and we would stand and salute. Well, some of us would. But anyway, all of that changed in 1976 when the ABC broadcast 24 hours a day. So no more God Save the Queen at, well, in fact, in 76, it wouldn't have been God Save the Queen anymore, would it? So, but anyway, nevertheless, our national anthem. Community radio, which is what I want to concentrate on this afternoon, commenced in 1972. And very excitingly, it happened here in South Australia. The Adult Education Department of Adelaide Uni was granted a licence for tertiary education purposes by Dr. Moss Cass. He was in the Whitlam government. He was the Minister for Transport and Communication, and he granted this licence in 1972. And that was the first in Australia, and it happened right here in Adelaide. In 1975, 5UV was granted approval for a licence on the AM band, and the licence stated it was granted for public access, music and topical talks, and thus the first community radio station really commenced. Community, or in fact back then it was known as public radio, was seen as complementing commercial radio and the ABC. It was never meant to be competing with them, but purely complementing them, and really just adding a third arm to what was available, both with commercial radio and the ABC. 5UV is, of course, now known as Radio Adelaide, and they've moved from North Terrace, and they now share studios with Fresh FM. In, well, now, 2020, there's over 400 community radio stations in Australia, which is remarkable and shows extraordinary growth, particularly in the last 20 years, just been exceptional. The peak body of community radio is the CBAA, and that stands for the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. They have an annual conference, which is always excellent, and it travels around the country. They try and have it in a different state each year. They do a lot of lobbying to government, particularly federal government, on our behalf. So they're based in Sydney, I should have added that, and they're constantly down in Canberra trying to lobby on our behalf, and particularly with the virus, they've been very active and in wanting to assist all the various 400 radio stations located around Australia. They're very involved with training, and again, particularly since the virus has been active, offering, courses online. And they also provide a lot of expertise, which as a member of the CBAA we can tap into. So they've been a wonderful organisation. In 2019, they conducted a survey. In fact, they conduct the surveys very regularly, but referring to the survey that was done last year, it's established that there's 5.8 million Australians listening to community radio right around the country on a weekly basis, which is a huge figure. Why do they listen to community radio, I hear you ask? Well, 48% of them listen for local news and information. That's the main driver. But 31% listen because they want to hear specialty music that's not available on, particularly on commercial radio. 31% also listen because they like local voices and personalities. 29% because they want to hear a lot more Australian music content and listen to Australian artists. And 29% also like listening to community radio because they're independent. We're not aligned to any corporation or government, and so that's a key point as to why they listen to community radio. Here in South Australia, we have a very active body, most probably the most active of all the states in Australia. We have a state body called SACBAR, which is the South Australian Community Broadcasting Association, an excellent organisation and have provided some very good content since the virus has been out and about. Now, I think this figure is correct, but I think there are 29 community radio stations in South Australia, and so SACBAR represent those stations, and 11 of those stations are based in Adelaide. But there are stations, I won't list them all, but there are stations in Woomera, Roxby Downs, Ceduna, there's 2 in Mount Gambier. Bordertown is interesting. They actually have 3 transmitters, so even though the station is located in the old telecom building in Bordertown, they actually have a transmitter in Keith, and they have another one, I think it's at Narracourt, but I stand to be corrected. And so they spread their signal over a very wide area of the southeastern part of South Australia. There's 2 community radio stations in Victor Harbour. There's one on Kangaroo Island called Kicks FM in Kingscote, and there's others too. So, and I think that's what community radio is so necessary for, particularly in areas like Woomera and Roxby Downs, where there's little to choose from when it comes to radio. As I mentioned, there are 11 community radio stations in Adelaide, and I know some of you listening this afternoon will think, 11? Because most people express great surprise when I mention that. Some of the better known ones are Fresh FM, who has by far the biggest audience of the community radio stations in Adelaide. They're pitched at the youth market, and they have a very large audience. Life FM is another one. They're a Christian radio station. Interestingly, the 2 radio stations, community radio stations in Australia, are both in Sydney with the largest audiences, and they're both Christian radio stations. So they're very well supported, both financially and with listeners. And then the 3rd radio station here in Adelaide, community radio station with the biggest audience, is Coast FM. So we sit in 3rd position. We pitch ourselves at the mature-aged market, and it's been very successful for us. But there are other radio stations. There's 5RPH, 5MBS that plays a lot of classical music and jazz, 5EBI that specialises in foreign language programs, 3D over in Kent Town. They also play a lot of alternate music, and there's other community radio stations as well, as I said, totaling 11 in Adelaide. Well, let's talk about the most popular radio station, Coast FM. We commenced in 1986 up at the TAFE College at O'Halloran Hill, up near the old drive-in. And they commenced doing test broadcasts. And finally, in 1992, they were granted their full licence and have been broadcasting 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, ever since then, since 1992. They have a general licence, or we have a general licence, to cater for the southwestern section of Adelaide. So primarily the southwestern part of Adelaide is what we focus on. However, having said that, we can't climb up into the clouds and prevent our airwaves from travelling further. And so you can comfortably pick us up in Aldinga and down at Salix Beach and further. And also, I've picked it up in the main street of Tanunda in the Barossa. So Coast FM's airways travel a long way. You can certainly get us in Edithburgh across the water. However, we do struggle in the hills. So we don't have a FM, which I'll come to shortly, does struggle in the hills, and so does our signal. In 1998, we moved down from O'Halloran Hill to Glandore, and we're actually based now at the Glandore Community Centre, and that's where our 2 studios are located. However, we still send our signal up to O'Halloran Hill, and it's transmitted from O'Halloran Hill out across the airwaves of Adelaide. We did a survey, an internal survey back in 2017, which told us that our listeners are located in 121 postcodes in Adelaide. Now, Adelaide has a lot of small suburbs and a lot of postcodes, but nevertheless, that was an amazing feat. 121 postcodes where our listeners live. The most recent formal survey that was done was in July last year, and it told us that 194,000 people are listening to us over a month. So at any time over a month, 194,000 people. That doesn't mean they're listening to us all the time, but they're tuning in, they're tuning out. But it's a very big listenership, and it actually represents 18% of Adelaide's population, which is quite extraordinary. We're the 11th most listened to radio station in Adelaide, and that's of all radio stations in Adelaide, and I believe there are 29. And as I said a little earlier, we're the third most listened to community radio station in Adelaide. 56% of our listenership is male, and 30% of our listeners are aged between 55 and 69. And so, as I said earlier, we cater for the mature age. Our biggest group of listeners live in the southern suburbs, which you would expect because of our licence agreement. But interestingly, our second biggest area is the northern suburbs. A lot of English immigrants still there who love the type of music that we play. And so we have a very strong following in the northern suburbs as well. Like, I was going to say, like all community radio stations, we exist because we have lots of volunteers. We have 95 presenters currently. Now, some of those are part of a roster system where we have programs that might have anywhere between 2 and 10 people who are rostered on to do their program. But nevertheless, we currently have 95 presenters. That's over a week. And but around about 120, 130 volunteers regularly keeping the radio station afloat. That's Adelaide's Coast FM. We only employ one person, and that's Deborah, who's the office coordinator. Everyone else is a volunteer, and it's a wonderful way to run a radio station, and we're very lucky and very fortunate to have such generous volunteers. Mind you, it's a great hobby. Where do we get our income from? Well, membership. We've got in excess of 480 members, and so membership's a big driver. Fundraising, of course, and sponsorship. Sponsorship for us is a huge part of our income, and also grants. We don't rely on grants. Some community radio stations, particularly in small regional areas, have no option but to really rely on government grants to keep themselves afloat. We try very hard to be financially independent at Coast FM, but if there's a grant going, we'll go for it. And the Marion City Council have been very supportive of our radio station. But sponsorship is by far our biggest financial driver. What is sponsorship, you ask? Well, it's similar to commercials, but it's not. There is a subtle difference. With sponsorship, you're only allowed to have 5 minutes per hour, and I don't mean 5 minutes and 5 seconds. I mean 5 minutes. They are very strict. So it's 5 minutes per hour, and every sponsorship announcement must be tagged at the end. In other words, this is Joe Blogg's record shop, and it's proudly supported by a proud Adelaide Coast FM sponsor. So it must have a tag at the end. We have 3 sponsorship agents currently who are selling on our behalf. They're not employed by us. They work independently and they work on commission only. But they're very, very active. And we have a sponsorship car as well that they drive around in that has the Coast FM logo on it. And it's a very colourful vehicle. And to give you an idea of sponsorship, Channel 7 is currently our biggest sponsor, and they sponsor to a very large amount of money. Why? Because we have a mature age audience, and they know that for television, very importantly, you need to capture that market at 6 o'clock at night with the news, and Channel 7 really promote their news very, very heavily during our 5 drive programs, Monday to Friday. so that they can promote their news service. And we've got other very large sponsors as well, Flight Centre and numerous other organisations, Noel's Caravans, another one, some very large groups, but Channel 7 is certainly our flagship sponsor currently, and we're thrilled to have them on board. We broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until late last year. I think 5AA were also doing the same, but I believe we're now the only station that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and live. So by that I mean that we have presenters who come in at midnight and present their music until 3 in the morning. And then we've got another very loyal group who come in at 3 in the morning. Remember, these are all volunteers, they're not paid. They come in at 3 in the morning and broadcast till 6 when the breakfast announcer takes over. So we're live, whereas the ABC, just using them as an example, at midnight they move over to Sydney, and so what you're listening to is Sydney, occasionally Melbourne, but it's usually Sydney after Peter Gers finishes up. And when's that? That's 10 o'clock at night. So at 10 o'clock at night they swing over to Sydney, and most of the commercial stations do something similar. Once you've got your license, it's not a fait accompli that you've got it forever. So you have to have a license renewal, and that happens every 5 years. And it's very thorough. They really put you through the hoops. It's not a matter of just rubber stamping and giving you another 5 years. Not at all. You've really got to confirm to them, to the authorities, that you're in a position to have your license renewed. Excuse me. Training. Look, training is absolutely essential, and we offer 2 courses per year. It's important for a variety of reasons. Look, people retire, people pass away, they move interstate, they move overseas, they tire of being a presenter. There's numerous reasons. And so you need new blood coming through all the time. It's just essential. And so we really try very hard to have 2 courses a year, usually somewhere between 10 and 15 people on our courses. They run for 6 weeks. And if you're listening to me this afternoon and thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind giving it a go, well, you just ring Deborah in the office, excuse me, and obviously the virus has put a spanner in the works, but we'll have courses up and running again, and you'd be very welcome to participate. Some years ago, and I think it was 2003 from memory, the station decided that we needed to take really control of what we were broadcasting. And so from Monday to Friday between 6 in the morning and 6 at night, we have a very strong bias towards the baby boomer or mature age market, that particular demographic. And so we play a lot of music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and now the 80s. And that's why we've been so successful for catering for that mature age market. So that's between 6 in the morning and 6 at night, Monday to Friday. We have other programs as well, and we also have a strong country music following, but it's mainly rock and pop from the 50s, 60s and 70s that really drives our radio station during that time. Also during that time, Monday to Friday between 9 and 12 noon, we have a program called Coast Magazine, and which is one that I present on a Wednesday. And that's really great because it means that we get an opportunity to do what a community radio station should do, and that's talk to the community, cater for the community. And so we interview people from Rotary, Probus, the Fringe, the Blood Bank. We do movie reviews. We speak to the Cancer Council, local councils. The mayors of the various councils are interviewed once a month. The Kiwanis Club is another group that's involved, and there's numerous other organisations that we speak to during Coast Magazine, and it's a wonderful way to communicate with your community. I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's true, and a very important program. I'm biased, of course, but I think it serves a wonderful purpose. So that's Coast Magazine between 9 and 12. I said before that I present the the Coast magazine on a Wednesday, and my personal passion is rock and roll music from the 60s. And so I've made it a point of trying to interview artists of yesteryear from that period. And I just thought I'd rattle off some of the people that I've interviewed, just to give you a taste for the type of music that I present and who I've chatted to over the last few years since I sold my business and retired. Keith Podker from the Seekers, Normie Rowe, Tony Woolsey, Jeff Skews, the late Jeff Skews from the Vibrants, John Bywaters from the Twilights, Digger Revell, Vince Maloney from the Aztecs, Darryl Braithwaite, Buddy England, Ray Burton, that was interesting. He's from Sydney, and he co-wrote I Am a Woman for Helen Reddy, and he had a fascinating tale. Frankie Davison, Robbie G, Doug Ashdown, who had that wonderful hit song, Winter in America. Bobby Bright from Bobby and Laurie. Petula Clark, that was just very special to talk to her. She was delightful. Peter Asher from Peter and Gordon. Tony Moller, that was interesting. He's an Australian who lived in England for many years and played with a band over there called Unit 4+2 and wrote all their hits as well. And he's now back living in New South Wales. Graham Spider Webb, who was a disc jockey on Radio Caroline, bouncing around in the sea in the English Channel in the 60s. Just a couple of weeks ago, I chatted to David Moyse, the guitarist for Air Supply. Leo Sayer I chatted to recently, and local singer Andy Upton, and there's others as well. But that's my absolute passion and what I enjoy doing. After 6 o'clock at night, we have access and specialty programming, and it's planned for after 6 o'clock at night so that we meet our community radio obligations. So Monday to Friday, after 6 at night, and also weekend radio as well. And typical community radio programs after 6 o'clock at night, we have Adelaide City Life on a Monday, and talk to lots of different community groups, including almost a next door neighbour of ours, the Puddle Jumpers, who are an amazing organisation who provide food for families who are in trouble. And I've just heard recently, in fact, that every Monday night people line up to get food parcels, and they normally average about 400 people on a Monday evening, and recently, because of the virus, that's jumped up to 1,000. So Adelaide City Life really supports Puddle Jumpers. Sports Cap's another program that is very popular on a Thursday. They've got 10 on their panel, and they take it in turns to talk about all sorts of sports, from football, cricket, rowing, you name it, basketball. They cover it all. Vets on Air is another very popular one. That's on a Tuesday night. We're not talking about vets and animals. We're talking about Vietnam veterans, and a very popular program, and been running for a long time now, well over 10 years. Bible Spotlight on a Sunday evening. Moto Chat's an interesting one. That's most probably, without doubt, Adelaide's only motorbike program, and very, very popular on a Wednesday night. And there's other programs as well. And we also, after 6 o'clock at night, cater for more specialty music, because not everyone likes Freddie and the Dreamers and Herman's Hermits. And so after 6 o'clock at night, and also at weekends, we cater for more specialty music, things like jazz and blues and rockabilly, swing on a Sunday afternoon on the Orange Blossom Special, local bands on a Tuesday night with Sound Cage, heavier rock as well on Thursday and Friday nights, fairly late in the evening, and soul music as well as another one that's very, very popular. So we cater for lots of other genres of music as well. Coast FM has, several things I should mention too. One, we have a very popular Facebook page, and that's always worth looking at. And the other thing, of course, that you can get hold of Coast FM by streaming. We stream, I should say. Coast FM streams. And so if you're interstate, in the country, up in the hills or overseas, you can still listen to Coast FM. And we have people regularly, like every week, listening to certain programs that they love. You know, they're in America, Canada, the UK, and they're listening to Coast FM. So live streaming is very, very important. We have special activities as well. Our very popular open day, which is usually in late October or early November. That's most probably our biggest event of the year. Very, very popular. We'll get anywhere between 3,000 and 6,000 people attending, depending on the weather. And it's free. We don't charge, but we do have lots of fundraising activities throughout the day, Devonshire teas and barbecue and lots of other things too. So it also raises a lot of money for us. So that's our open day. We do outside broadcasts. The most recent one was in February. We were down at the Brighton Surf Club for their Brighton Classic Swim, and all the girls people get dressed up in Marilyn Monroe outfits and go into the sea as well. So we were there doing an outside broadcast there. Peter and Jill did a very successful one and interviewed lots of people on the day. In the past, we've been to the Royal Adelaide Show for the 10 days, and that's been very successful. We have an annual quiz night in Thepperton, and that's very, very popular, hugely successful. We have a cabaret night. And we always, every year, participate in the Rock and Roll Rendezvous up at Birdwood. And we do numerous other things too, but they're just one of the things that I wanted to highlight. Something that I'm very proud of for the last 4 years, together with the City of Marion, we've done an OB, or outside broadcast, on Australia Day, putting to air the induction of new citizens of the at the council's citizenship ceremony. It's a very exciting event to be at, and to see these people so excited and to wanting to participate in and becoming Australians. And so we're there putting that all to air. And I must make special mention of the Mayor of Marion, Chris Hanna, who's just amazing at the way he can interview people on air and pronounce everyone's surnames, and without wanting to offend anyone, you know, you'll come across some Sri Lankans with 26 letters in their surname, and he just nails it. He is extraordinary. And we've won an award at the annual Sackbar dinner for that broadcasting of the citizenship ceremony at the City of Marion. I just wanted to quickly mention too that now, because of the virus, the Marion City Council approached us to present updates on a regular basis because the Messenger newspaper is sadly in recess at the moment. And so we're doing that, the Marion updates every day, every second day, I should say, Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays at 9:40. And so if you want to catch up with what's happening with the City of Marion, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays at 9:40, and it's usually a live read for 4 or 5 minutes, sometimes an interview. So we're just there wanting to keep all the citizens within the council area up to date. I think I've talked at 1,000,000 miles an hour and most probably gone too quickly, but nevertheless, I just wanted to finish by saying that community radio is just the most wonderful hobby, and I couldn't recommend it enough. And thank you for listening, and thank you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's great. We've had a couple of questions come in, so let's have a look. So Jill would like to know, are there any radio stations that regularly put on plays?
That regularly put on plays? The answer is yes. Our Friday Coast Magazine program with Brenton and Shiona, they now put on a play. I think it's once a month. I stand to be corrected. But it's locally written, locally produced, and a real old-fashioned radio play like we knew back in the 50s and 60s. And Brenton and Shiona are very involved with that.
Excellent. Bridget's just asked, the last session that you mentioned was at 9:40 p.m. or a.m.? I think she's...
a.m. 9:40 a.m. Monday to Friday in the morning. Yep.
Wonderful. I think you've also answered Bridget's other question. She said, if I was interested in joining and working with Coast FM, what do I need to do? And do you provide training for people wanting to work, volunteer with Coast FM? And is there a cost for the training?
Yes, there is a cost, and I don't have that in front of me. But if she was to ring Deborah at the office, and I will give you the phone number right now, I should be able to remember it, but I can't, 5371 5887, 5371 5887, and ask for Deborah. Now, we haven't been able to present. Normally, we would present a training course, in March, and we couldn't do that. But she'll be able to give you an idea of when the next one is, and if not, she'll take name and phone number so that we can contact you, and and she'll be also to tell her how much the course is. But it goes for 6 weeks. It's very thorough, and we'd be delighted to have her on board.
Wonderful. If you missed that phone number, anyone, just feel free to email myself and I can send that through to you as well.
Right.
Lynn wants to know, what do you think is the strength of community radio?
The strength of community radio?
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn. The single biggest strength, I think, is the fact that it's access radio. It's giving people an opportunity to go on the airwaves that otherwise would never have that opportunity, because commercial radio and the ABC obviously do a fine job, but it's very narrow. You've got to be a professional, and so with community radio, you most certainly do not have to be a professional, and so it's open to anyone. Now, having said that, our training course is very good. Some people don't pass the training course, so it's a bit like trying to get on the cricket team or the football team or the netball team, but nevertheless, it's access radio, and I believe that that's its single biggest strength.
Great. Jodie says, well done, Coast FM, for being number 3. Yay. But she also says, I can understand that Coast FM aims at the older market segment, but it disappoints me that Coast FM calls it our community radio station, but it isn't aiming at the broader community. Community radio needs to be inclusive. Why did Coast FM decide to exclusively cater for only one group in our community?
That's a very good question. And my answer, and this is not the official answer of the radio station, but my personal view is that the younger generation is well and truly catered for. I think I said before there are, 29 radio stations in Adelaide. That's the ABC and commercial and community, and the majority of those cater, in my opinion, for the younger demographic. And so back in 2003-04, when we decided to cater for the mature age market, there was in fact musically no other radio stations doing that. I'd come from Victoria and was appreciative of how successful it was being done in Melbourne. Now, of course, we have Cruise, which is very similar to Coast FM in many ways, but of course they're commercial. But and so we had that market on our own for a long time, and it was very, very successful for us from a sponsorship point of view. Extremely successful, and allowed us to, redo our 2 studios and invest in a lot of equipment, because of course we're a not-for-profit organisation, so it wasn't money in the bank, it was being invested back into the radio station. Having said that too, I can expand and say that after 6 o'clock at night, younger members of our population can get involved with the radio station, and in fact we have 2 programs. One on a Tuesday night that's been running for many years with Mandy, that plays music for the younger demographic, and also Michael on a Wednesday, Michael at 6 o'clock, who definitely caters for a younger generation. But I make no apologies from a personal point of view. I think that it was the mature age market that was being sadly neglected, and we were being discriminated against. So I see us at Coast FM doing a wonderful role for the older demographic of Adelaide.
Sounds good. I must admit, I listen in on Saturday night sometimes when we're with friends, and I consider myself too mature, Rob, thank you, but we enjoy it. I hope I'm not that mature anyway, but yes. It's got something for everyone. Speaking of that, how do local bands get featured on your Sound Cage segment? I think that's what you said the segment was called on Tuesday.
Yes. Okay, well, the answer is that you would get in touch with the radio station, to Deborah in the office, leave a note for Mandy. Mandy Ferry is the presenter's name on a Tuesday night. Sound Cage is on between 8 and 10. It's been running for well over 10 years. Leave a message for Mandy, and I'm sure she'd be happy to promote the local band, whoever they are.
Excellent. Somebody also asks, what medium is used to play music? For example, record, CD, etc.
That's a great question. Well, you're talking. I'm a dinosaur, so I still use vinyl. We have 2 turntables in each studio, and I play a lot of vinyl. And there's most probably about 10 of us, I suppose, who still use and play use the turntables and play a lot of vinyl. The vast majority play CDs, and but growing all the time. Some of the more switched-on presenters are coming in with their own laptops and coming in with their music already on the laptop, and that's growing. I don't plan to go down that path, but some of the more switched-on presenters are certainly doing that.
Great. Scott wants to know, are there any plans to start broadcasting on digital radio anytime soon?
Not with Coast FM, no. There are certain community radio stations in Adelaide, such as Radio Adelaide, 3D Radio, and others that are already on digital, but Coast FM, no plans.
Excellent. Jody says the BBC has an annual radio play competition. Any chance that Coast FM would have opportunities for emerging playwrights?
Gosh, what a question. That's a great question. And I can't answer that, but I'll say yes. And I think if they were to leave a message with, again, with Deborah in the office, to leave for Shiona, who presents on a Friday with Brenton, and they may be able to do something.
Great. Talking about the plays, Bridget also made a comment. Have you thought about playing some of the old radio plays or comedy series, for example, Life with Dexter, Guess What, etc.?
Well, we do have a couple of things on air now and have been running for a long time. We every day at 20 minutes to 11, we do the Passing Parade with John Doremus, which is hugely popular. We have another serial that we run every day, twice a day in fact, 8:30 in the morning and 5:30 in the evening during breakfast and drive. And that's Cactus, which is very, very popular. It can be very naughty and can sit right on the cusp sometimes, but they're very, very clever. And we've been running Cactus for a long time now. And in fact, we've just renewed the contract very recently.
Excellent. I think we've got time for maybe one more. So any famous faces or voices that started out in community radio that you know of?
I can only talk about Melbourne radio, but in Melbourne radio, the one that springs to mind straight away is the Could Have Been Champions with Greg Champion, who of course is originally from Adelaide. They've been been around for over 20 years. Oh, more than 20 years. What am I talking about? 30 years plus. And they started on Triple R in Melbourne, which is the community radio station in Melbourne with the single biggest audience in Melbourne, 3 Triple R. So the Could Have Been Champions are huge. Dave Hughes started in Warrnambool, which is where I started my time in community radio on 3-Way FM. And there's a few others from Warrnambool who've gone on. They've just had a mental block, but Dave Hughes certainly springs to mind. Punter to Punter was another very popular program that went on into commercial radio, and I'm sure there's numerous others that I just had a blank on.
No, all good. We'll just pop in this one last question from Jody. So she just wants to know if Coast FM, do they hire out studio time?
We haven't done that, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't. So if she's interested, again, leave her details with Deborah at the office, and that's something that the board could look at. I'm not aware that we've ever done it, but I think the idea is a splendid one.
Great, excellent. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our talk this afternoon with you, Rob. So thank you so much. It's such an interesting background that radio has in our state, and it's so wonderful to hear that Adelaide's Coast FM, our local City of Marion station, has so many amazing volunteers that make sure that we, the radio station reaches us every day. I know that us at the libraries, we wouldn't, our volunteers are amazing as well. So they do a great job.
Yeah. Thank you. And I've really thank you for the invitation, Tracy. I've really enjoyed it.
No, that is fine. So please follow the City of Marion Library's Facebook page, the City of Marion website, and check your inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops. And if you haven't already registered, this Thursday evening, publisher Lynette Washington will talk with celebrated author Victoria Perman about the new crime anthology from Glimmer Press, Thrill Me. So that is going to be a great one. So please tune in for that. Thanks again, Rob, for joining us, and thank you to all of you as well.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.